Thank you so much for letting me have a few minutes in front of your distinguished audience today. Those of you who know me know that my family motto is Carpe Podium, but I will keep my remarks as brief as I can. After such a moving display, however, there's a couple of things that I want to make a point about as I'm introducing our distinguished keynote. You may have seen that the President is going to be putting forward a package to the Senate to move for ratification of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. This is a long hoped for movement in the United States, not just in disability, but across all of the human rights activities that we really need to be stepping up now in the international community. The UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities includes language on technology. It includes language on families and how families are to be respected. It includes language on school and inclusion in school. It includes language on the right to community living. There is much there that we think are the principles of how we interact with folks with disabilities in the United States. Many people think that we are the world leader and that everyone just has to follow us and everything will be okay. But people who are still living in some of these institutions that the artist has identified as still operating will tell you that we have not yet accomplished the kind of world leadership that we think really needs to happen. I want to point out a little bit of technology that I find extremely useful. I carry two of these now. One is for my office, and I think of it like a small yapping dog. And then I carry this one, which is my personal one, where people can reach me, and I have all of those of you that I'm connected to in here. But I also have an app that is my favorite app, and I want to make an offer, but first I want to let you know I have an app that is the Universal Declaration on Human Rights on my phone. Because one of the responsibilities as citizens of the world is that we are all supposed to understand the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and what it means and how we can use it in our everyday lives. When we have the arts of making and doing, that is techne, it's very important to have those be based on wisdom and knowledge and principles. And so as we move forward to develop more and more making and doing for people with disabilities, it's very important for us to go back to these principles. It ties to our speaker today, and I'm going to explain that to you in a minute, but I just want to read Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in a spirit of brotherhood. I think it's important to recognize that human rights are not just the rights that we all have to be treated well by other people, but it's that we all have the right to act with conscience. We have the right to treat other people with humanity. We have the right to be fully human in ourselves. This is not easy sometimes. Sometimes the systems stand against us. Sometimes it takes a great deal of effort to act with conscience and in a spirit of brotherhood toward all other people. You've heard me say many times before that I think the Coleman and Turner families are a prime example of how we can do this in our lives and what kind of difference it can make. If you look at what we have rights to, we have, as people with disabilities and their families, we often think about the right to remedy. The right to remedy in school, the right to remedy in healthcare, the right to remedy in many places. Remedy is dangerous. We just lost one of our tremendous advocates in the disability field, Paul Miller, died on Tuesday morning. Paul wrote a brilliant paper about genomics and how there is a danger that the technology of genomics will turn into genocide for people with disabilities. It's important for us to keep that in mind as we move forward. We also know that we have the right to rehab. We have the right to accommodations. Many of us have tools that we use and carry around and depend on. Getting those technologies, the rehab technologies into people's lives are sometimes difficult. As Peter Blank said to me a few minutes ago, you know, getting the Medicaid rules to apply to allow you to acquire the technologies that you need is not always easy to do. Apps are technologies. I also have an IEP checklist on my iPhone. And here's the offer I want to make. If anybody wants to do an app on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, drop me a line at NIDR, sue.swenson@ed.gov, and I'll see if I can find a way to pay you for it. Rights are not something that just fall on you out of the sky. If you don't carry them around, either in your iPhone or in your heart, you don't have them. You think that rights are something that everyone else owes you, but in fact, as we know in the disability movement, it's our ability to express and demand our rights that makes the biggest difference. And so it's important to recognize how many ways can we help people understand their rights. That's why an app for the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities would be so useful. For that matter, an app on the ADA would be useful. The United States International Council on Disability is doing a very interesting technology project where they have something called the web in a box. Don't ask me how they do this, but they basically take everything about disability and disability rights and put it in a hard drive that they can take to parts of the world where there is no internet access at all. And okay, so maybe we're hoping that someday there will be internet access, but those people's lives are proceeding even today, even yesterday. And they do need to know about their rights. And that's a very interesting use of technology to think about doing that. Now, the last right that the UN Declaration gives us that I think, that the Universal Declaration on Human Rights gives us that I think we really need to think about is the right to revolution. Each of us in our lives has the right. And it's expressed as we have to recognize each other's human rights so that there will not be rebellion and war. But we also have the right, fully expressed in the Declaration, to social and cultural revolution in our lives. This is how we avoid political and military revolution. When we look around and say, you know what, we need more equity, we need more freedom, we need to reach out to people who have been exiled within our own country. And we need to make sure that that never happens again. Now here's the connection to Tom Gilhool. The Universal Declaration on Human Rights was written with a great deal of input from early parent leaders of the ARC. Gunnar Du Bois, and even before him, the UN sent people to the United States to study what happened when you institutionalized people and why did all these families think that it was such a bad idea. Now, the Coleman Center on Cognitive and Intellectual Disabilities, sometimes people in the disability world think that those of us who are in that world of cognitive and intellectual disabilities are on the bottom rung of the ladder. They treat us as if, well, when we're done getting rights for everyone else, we'll get to you. But I really want to point out that it was people with cognitive and intellectual disabilities and their families who led the demand for human rights and for rights all throughout history. And we need to take that piece of our history and hold it tight. Mr. Gilhool will explain to you that it was the parents of the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children, at the time that was what it was called, who brought a suit that said the people who live in Pennhurst have a right to a free and appropriate public education, and the institution should be closed, and the people, all of the children, have a right to an education. 1.8 million children in the United States were not in school, or were in schools that were run by their parents outside of the system. Or they were living in these places that you just saw. Which, by the way, I don't know how you took it, but I felt a little surge of happiness whenever I saw the line closed on the picture. And then I felt this extreme need to remember the accumulation of misery in these empty places. And how miserable it must have been to be a child and be taken from your family and put in a place and not educated and not given clothes that were your own to wear and not allowed to have any freedom in your life at all. Now, Tom Gilhool started out doing public interest law. I think you were almost 30 years at the Public Interest Law Center in Philadelphia. Was one of the founders of the disability law movement in the United States. Was a hero of Sergeant Shriver's. I don't know if you knew that, but he told me that multiple times. And brought the Park case that turned into not only IDEA, but turned into 503, 504, and 508 in the Voc Rehab Act. And has done a significant amount of international work, including a Fulbright Fellowship in Japan, working to help ensure that across national boundaries we can cooperate with each other. This, I believe, is the big plus of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. It brings us the responsibility as U.S. nonprofits to interact with other nonprofits around the world in civil society to create a better foundation of knowledge and wisdom and principles for our technology.